Is cheese maxing an expression in and of itself, or is just maxing is the expression? So today we're going to be cheese maxing and brock maxing. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Kenji. We're going to make some broccoli and cheese soup. So broccoli and cheese soup, it's not actually a thing that I grew up eating. I just recorded an episode of my podcast, The Recipe with Kenji and Deb, about broccoli and cheese soup. Neither Deb nor I really grew up eating broccoli and cheese soup. So my first experience with it was maybe 7 or 8 years ago when a lot of people were like, oh, do you have a broccoli cheese soup recipe? And I'm like, I don't, because I've never had it. And then I did some research and found out that most people's idea of what broccoli cheese soup is comes from two different places. It's either Panera, who has a real famous broccoli and cheese soup that's been on their menu since they opened and is real popular. The other place that people draw their flavor memories from are the Campbell's canned cheddar and broccoli soup, which was introduced in 1990. It was Campbell's most popular flavor since 1955, in 55 years, that is. It was their most popular flavor in 55 years. And if you were alive and conscious around 1990 or 1989, you might remember when George Bush Sr., when he became president, he told his mother essentially on national TV, like, I've always hated broccoli, and now that I'm president of the United States, I'm not going to eat any more broccoli. And so Campbell's rolled that into an ad campaign to try and get him and other people to eat broccoli, and they did it by smothering it in cheese. So I've always thought of broccoli cheddar soup as kind of just like an excuse to make it sort of acceptable to eat a bowl of nacho cheese sauce for lunch, Although I think there's some recipes tend to balance balance the cheese and the broccoli in different ways. Some of them are very broccoli forward, like my friend Deb Perlman's on Smitten Kitchen is real broccoli forward. My recipe, I try and go broccoli max and cheese max. Am I using that expression right? That's a Gen Z thing, right? Is that right? Broccoli?
Cheese maxing.
Cheese max. Oh, okay. So today we're going to be cheese maxing and brock maxing. So in order to brock max, I treat my broccoli in two different ways. So I take the stems, which have, according to Jacques Pepin, they have more broccoli flavor than the florets do. We're going to take those stems, slice them up pretty small, and then I'm going to saute them with my other vegetables as the sort of flavor base of the soup. They're going to get blended into the soup. And meanwhile, the florets, I'm also going to cut real small, but these ones I'm going to char. So the problem I've had when I was testing recipes for broccoli soup, I tried a bunch of different recipes that I found in various cookbooks and online. Some of them were sort of Panera copycats. What I found was that in a lot of them, you end up with a sort of dull broccoli flavor because, well, a lot of them are slow cooker recipes, and so you end up with this kind of real overcooked broccoli flavor. And none of them had my favorite flavor of broccoli, which is like a heavily charred, when the broccoli gets like a little bit black and really nice and nutty. I didn't find a single soup that had that flavor, so I thought to myself, oh, it would be nice if I had that flavor in my soup. So what we're going to do is we're going to char the florets, and then we're going to get a sort of base broccoli flavor out of the stems. All right, so I'm slicing off the florets, I'm cutting them down into little pieces. And then the stems, I'm going to slice thin enough that they can be sauteed. All right, we want a pot big enough to hold a couple quarts. This is a 4-quart brazier. This is actually also Deb Perlman's brazier. I'm not paid to advertise this or anything, but she makes a real good brazier that she collaborated with Staub on. It's an excellent pan. All right, so we're gonna let this get hot enough that it starts to shimmer, and then we're gonna add our florets in. And in the meantime, I will get my other vegetables ready. So I've got carrots chopped fine, and onion. For some reason, carrots and onion seem to be always the vegetables of choice when making broccoli soup. I don't really know why. I guess the sweetness of no, I don't know. I can make up some nonsense, but I think it just is what it is, Onions just sliced. The shape of these things doesn't really matter too much, the carrots and onions and broccoli florets, as long as they're kind of thin enough that they're going to saute because we're going to puree everything real smooth anyway. So none of this is going to end up in the final soup in its final form. In fact, we can mix it all together. So that's all going to get sauteed together. Along with, oh, where did I put my, oh, garlic, there we go. 3 cloves of garlic. And trim off the ends. And this garlic we're also going to slice. All right, our pan looks like it's almost ready. So, you know, basically like when the oil gets a sort of, almost like the consistency of water, you know, when it thins out to the point that it starts to shimmer like that and flow real easily, that's when we're going to go in and set our hand towel on fire. All right, so here I'm going to let the broccoli sit without moving. The idea is that I want that bottom side to char, but I don't want the broccoli to soften too much. It's going to simmer a little bit in the soup at the end, so it'll do its sort of final cooking in the soup. So it's okay if it's still pretty sort of al dente and crunchy, as long as we have some good char on it. So that's going to take just about a minute. All right, so it's been about a minute, and I can smell that charring going on. I can smell that it's getting a little bit nutty. And then when I stir the broccoli, you can see all those nice little brown bits that come up. Can you see that, Michael? That's what you're looking for. We'll give it a stir, let it brown one more time. Once it's got sort of 2 levels of browning like that, we want to stop the cooking, or at least slow it down. So I'm just going to dump it out into a sheet tray. The idea is we want to give it a little bit of surface area so that it cools a little faster. Aluminum also is a great way to cool things down because aluminum's a real good conductor of heat, and so it'll help sort of channel the heat from the broccoli and release it out into the kitchen air. All right, so we're going to set that aside. Back over medium heat. And then I'm going to take a couple tablespoons of butter. And my vegetables. So that's the sliced broccoli stems, a carrot, an onion. I think in my recipe it says to chop the carrot very, very small. But honestly, because we are going to be blending all this, it doesn't really matter too much. So I don't actually care at all how you cut it. Whenever I saute vegetables, I also like to, or sweat vegetables that is, I like to add a little bit of salt. Partly for seasoning, obviously, but the salt is actually going to help draw out some of the moisture from inside the vegetables, which will help them sweat and soften a little more efficiently. So that's going to saute now for about 5 minutes and soften. In the meantime, let's talk thickeners. So a typical broccoli soup is going to be thickened with a roux. So what you would probably do in most recipes is at this stage, as you're cooking down your aromatics, you would add some flour in here. You know, so you might add like a 1/4 cup of flour for a couple cups of milk and a couple cups of stock. I tried doing that in my recipe. I find that when you add flour to a soup like this, it can sort of dull the flavor a little bit, and it can make it a little bit sort of goopy. I also tried using cornstarch. I also tried using sodium citrate, which is the emulsifying salt that you would find in something like an American cheese. You know, the reason you need a thickener, you might think to yourself, okay, like, well, cheese, when I melt it, is really nice and thick, so why can't cheese just be the thickener? The reason is that cheese, if you try and melt it on its own, it ends up breaking. So, you know, cheese is made up of water, fat, and then things that are called protein micelles. So protein micelles are essentially, if you think about a protein as like a tadpole with a positively charged side and a negatively charged side. What happens is that these tadpoles kind of go into like a little cluster where all of their heads are poking in one direction, so that their charges can line up and they can form these sort of long chains. They're called micelles, these little clusters of proteins. What happens in cheese as you heat it, though, is that those proteins start to tighten their bonds with each other. They get tighter and tighter, and eventually what's going to happen is that they're going to squeeze out the liquid from the cheese, and they're also going to squeeze out the fat, and so your cheese is going to break. And so if you've ever tried to just melt like a really, like aged cheddar cheese, or if you've made like cheese fondue, and you tried to melt Swiss cheese inside some wine and got it too hot, what happens is that the protein ends up as a clump at the bottom. There's like water, the whey that ends up floating at the top, and then at the very top you might end up with like a pool of fat, like a little fatberg floating around the top. So in order to prevent that from happening, there's a couple ways you can do it. One of them is to use an emulsifying salt, something like sodium citrate, and that's going to help those proteins stay emulsified. The other way you can do it is by physically thickening. So if you imagine, if you imagine your cheese proteins as kids playing a game of amoeba tag, if you've ever played amoeba tag, that's where you like, where someone's it and they run around and grab someone else, and then those two people become it, and eventually like they all grab each other into one big group, one big blob. That's sort of like what's happening with the protein in cheese. They're starting to cling to each other and turning into one big blob and squeezing everything else out. So imagine that's going on in a gym, but now instead of an open gym, you fill that gym with like pillows or like cotton balls or something that makes it so that the kids can't run around as easily and can't really reach each other as easily. That's essentially what you're doing when you add a thickener like flour, like the starch in flour, to a soup like this. It's going to physically impede the cheese from binding to itself, so the cheese will stay nice and emulsified. Now, the problem with using flour is that I find that it makes the flavor a little bit dull, and it makes the texture a little bit gloopy. So I experimented with a bunch of things, and eventually what I landed on was using a potato. So a potato, the idea for this came when I was working on a vegan nacho cheese sauce recipe, which you can find on Serious Eats. But I was trying to find, in that recipe also, I was trying to find a way to make a cheese sauce that had a sort of gooey texture, this texture of like a nacho cheese sauce, but didn't have any dairy in it. And you find that with flour, you don't get that gooiness. But if you've ever tried to make mashed potatoes by boiling potatoes and sticking them in a food processor, you know that essentially it turns into glue. Like it becomes real stretchy and gooey in a very similar way that like a nacho cheese sauce does. And so what I do in this recipe is I slice up a potato. We're gonna put it in our pan, and then I'm gonna add my liquid. So no flour, no cornstarch, nothing like that at all. So I'm going to do 3 cups of whole milk. That was 1.5 pounds of broccoli, by the way. You can get the recipe. I'll link to it below. 3 cups of whole milk and a couple cups of, well, the recipe calls for water or chicken stock. I'm going to do water plus some better than bouillon. So we're going to let this simmer now for about 30 minutes until all those vegetables really soften. And what's going to happen is that the potatoes cook, the starch granules in the potatoes start to swell, and then when we blend this all afterwards, the starch granules are going to burst, and you're going to get this really sort of heavy starchy release that is going to act to emulsify and thicken the soup up so that when we add our cheese, it's not going to break later on. And it does it without giving you sort of that dull floury flavor. Instead, I find the potato ends up giving it a much sort of cleaner, more vegetal, nicer flavor than flour does. This is a trick I use for, I don't know, whenever I'm making a soup that I want to have that texture, and I don't want to add flour to it. All right, we're going to let this come to a simmer, and it will simmer for about 30 minutes. So I will see you then. All right, so it's been about 20 minutes actually. At this point, the instructions for the recipe say to cook until the potatoes and broccoli are fully tender, which is where we are at this stage. So it didn't take the full half hour. Whenever I'm following a recipe, I always try and follow the cues, the visual or audio or tactile cues as opposed to the timing, because timing is always going to vary. Timing is always an approximation. All right, so I've got this Tillamook extra sharp cheddar cheese, and we are cheese maxing. So I've got two different types of cheese. I've got the extra sharp cheddar, mainly for flavor, and then I've also got this deli style American cheese, which is more for its texture than anything else. The deli style American cheese, it has those emulsifying salts. So in addition to the potato in here, those emulsifying salts are going to help that cheese texture get really nice and smooth and sort of gooey. To bump up some of that flavor, I'm also going to add a little bit of dry mustard powder. I do this frequently when I'm making like mac and cheese. I like to add a little bit of mustard powder to my cheese because it sort of accents the sharpness of the cheese. It's not really going to taste like mustard. It just kind of accentuates that sharpness of the cheese and gives it a little bit more flavor. All right. So at this stage, you can do it, I'm going to use a hand blender. You could also do this in a standing blender if you want, but we're going to basically blend this until it's completely smooth, and we're going to add in our cheese kind of a handful at a time. So that it emulsifies. This is 12 ounces of cheddar cheese and 8 ounces of American cheese, by the way, which is significantly more cheese than a lot of other recipes have. I think Deb's recipe, which is real broccoli forward, for a pound and a quarter of broccoli has 8 ounces of cheese, whereas my recipe for a pound and a half has a full 20 ounces of cheese. So it's about double the amount of cheese as in Deb's real sort of more broccoli-ish version, which is also a fantastic recipe, by the way. It's getting pretty close to about as smooth as we're going to get with a hand blender. If you want it like a real sort of silky smooth soup, you can do it with a standing blender and push it through a strainer. Let me taste it for seasoning. Oh, we haven't put any pepper in there yet. Some black pepper. I'm going to use some of this. This is a salt and MSG mix that I use. MSG just for a little bit more of that, umami flavor in there. All right, let's give that a taste. It's cheesy. All right, one last ingredient here. The other thing I like to add when I'm making a cheese sauce or mac and cheese is a few dashes of hot sauce. Not like a real spicy one, so I use Frank's. Just something that'll give it a little bit more vinegariness, a little bit of acidity, and just a touch of heat. Again, sort of just to accentuate that cheese flavor as opposed to really dominate it. All right, so at this stage, we're going to put our broccoli back in. And then we're going to simmer it just until that broccoli is heated through, but still real nice and bright green. I don't know. I think of this almost like a broccoli cheese casserole, but with the ratios reversed. All right, so we're at a simmer. Our broccoli is tender, and I think we're good to go. Look at that. Extra cheesy broccoli soup with a couple layers of cheese flavor, a couple layers of broccoli flavor, and potato as the thickener. So, to me, this gets a real sort of complex broccoli flavor. Wait, what is it again? Maxing?
Cheese maxing.
I'm broccoli maxing. Is cheese maxing an expression in and of itself, or is just maxing is the expression? All right. Today, yeah, this is really broccoli maxing and cheese maxing. So the broccoli flavor, we get a lot of good broccoli flavor background by simmering the stems, blending them into the soup, and then we char the florets to get that really nice nutty broccoli flavor on top of that. And then we are cheese maxing by adding 2 different types of cheese. We are using cheddar cheese, really nicely aged cheddar cheese, as well as some American cheese. And in order to keep all those flavors nice and bright, rather than using a flour roux to thicken our soup, we are using a potato. All right, broccoli and extra cheesy, extra broccoli, extra cheesy broccoli cheese soup. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, see you next time. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. You can find the full article and recipe along with bonus content and my newsletter for free on my Patreon. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos like this, or my alternate channel, Kenji Lopez Main, for my dining content. And follow me on Instagram at Kenji Lopez-Alt for daily updates. You can also get signed and personalized copies of any of my books. That's The Food Lab, The Walk, or my children's book, Every Night is Pizza Night, shipped from Book Larder here in Seattle. Find the links to all of this, as well as all of the tools I used in today's video, in the description below. Thanks.